The committee will come to order, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. And before we begin, Secretary Raimondo has informed us that she has only 2 hours available for this hearing. So in the interest of time, Ranking Member Lofgren and I are limiting ourselves to very brief opening statements, and we're asking the Secretary to do the same. Additionally, to give as many members as possible a chance to ask questions, and in concurrence with Ranking Member, I ask unanimous consent to limit each member's Q&A to 4 minutes without objection. So ordered. I would also like to request unanimous consent to submit 2 statements for the record. The first is from Chairman Lucas, who cannot be with us here today. As you know, he has had a terrible accident with a bull. He's a rancher, and he is recuperating. We look forward to his return soon and to his because his leadership is dearly missed. The second is a full opening statement for myself. Without objection, we will enter that. So I'll recognize myself for 1 minute for an opening statement. So I would say welcome to the Science, Space, and Technology Committee's first oversight hearing on the CHIPS for America program. Secretary Raimondo, we appreciate your willingness to testify today. Thank you for being here. I understand you were in traffic. I'm sorry to hear that. That's not a rare occurrence. But your last minute notice that you were only able to dedicate 2 hours of your time to discussing a $50 billion program is frustrating, to say the least, to the members of this committee who have a responsibility to oversee your use of these taxpayer dollars and ensure that the program is a success. I hope that you will at least commit to meeting in person with any members of this committee, whether Republican or Democrat, who are not able to ask the questions that they prepared for this hearing. And I hope that despite our time constraints that we'll be able to have a productive discussion today. Congress funded the CHIPS program to bolster national security and to ensure that semiconductors can be produced here in the United States in a cost-competitive way. But the policies advanced by this administration during implementation have been criticized for driving up the cost of doing business. So I expect that to be a strong topic of discussion today, along with guardrails to protect our investments from benefiting our adversaries. I look forward to the dialogue that we will have today, and I look forward to hearing more about the near-term future of the CHIPS program directly from the Secretary. So thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for taking the time to join us today. So I would like to now recognize the ranking member, gentlewoman from California, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and like you, I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be made part of the record. In the interest of time, I'll just say that CHIPS for America represents really a historic investment in reshoring our semiconductor manufacturing and innovation capacity. However, there are challenges in carrying out such an ambitious program. One of the concerns I have, which I've mentioned to the Secretary, is what steps the CHIPS program is taking to ensure that companies receiving funding implement the very highest standards for the handling of toxic chemicals. I come from Silicon Valley, where we've seen firsthand the tremendous benefits of the semiconductor industry, but also problematic environmental legacy of some chip production. So we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to revitalize the U.S. semiconductor industry, but we also have an opportunity to do it in a way that protects American workers. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now recognize, thank you, Ms. Lofgren. I recognize the Secretary for her testimony for 4 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good morning. A few things. One, I'm delighted to be here. Secondly, I spoke with the chairman yesterday and reassured him that I'm happy to spend any amount of time with any of you on any topic. Also, after speaking with you yesterday, we shifted the schedule a bit, so be able to be here for at least 2.5 hours. I just want to thank you for this chance to update you on the CHIPS and Science Act. As outlined in detail in my written testimony, we've made significant progress since about a year ago when the bill was passed. As evidence of that, for chips, we've received more than 500 statements of interest from companies who want to participate and about 100 applications for the incentive program. So we are on track to launch the National Semiconductor Technology Center this fall, which I know many of you will want to talk about. At EDA, we've launched 2 initiatives, the Tech Hubs initiative and the Recompete program. We're working as quick as we can to have announcements on both of those programs this fall. I will tell you both of these programs are massively oversubscribed. In addition, NTIA, NIST, and NOAA are working to implement additional provisions. Happy to talk about any of that. I just want to reiterate what you all know and what the Chair and Ranking Member have said. In addition, if successful in implementing CHIPS and Science, which is, as the Ranking Member said, unprecedented and historic, the U.S. will become the premier destination in the world for where we design new chip architectures, do research and development in our research labs, make chips for every end use, manufacture chips at scale with American workers in the United States, and package the most sophisticated chips in the world, all here on our shores. That's the vision that we're trying to achieve with your support, and with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
I want to thank the Secretary for her testimony. Now the Chair would recognize himself for 4 minutes. Secretary Raimondo, during negotiations of the CHIPS and Science Act, Science Committee Republicans developed strong guardrails that prohibit any company that accepts a grant incentive from expanding or building new advanced semiconductor manufacturing facilities in a country of concern, including China, for 10 years. The language also gives the authority to you, Madam Secretary, to recover any incentives received should a company be found in violation of this. Can you please provide a short update on when the Department of Commerce's rule for implementing the guardrails will be finalized so that we can review it, considering the public comment period ended in May?
Yes, thank you for your question. So the answer is very, very soon. In a matter of weeks, that will be completed. I'm trying to move as fast as I possibly can, but more important than going fast, we need to get it right, especially with respect to these guardrails. The whole purpose of the CHIPS program is national security, and so we have to be absolutely vigilant that not a penny of this helps China to get ahead of us, and that none of these companies who receive our money do any research with China or investment in China that in any way undermines our own national security. So very soon it'll be out, and look forward to working with all of you to implement this program to achieve its goals.
Okay. The CHIPS and Science Act requires guardrails to be a part of any agreement or contract the Department enters as part of the $39 billion taxpayer-backed CHIPS incentive program. How is it then that the Department has been accepting applications for the incentives program since March without the guardrails being finalized? And how is the Department making it clear what commitments that applicants will be required to make when applying for the program if this rule has not been finalized? It makes no sense.
Yeah. So as you can imagine, these are incredibly complicated applications. We're requiring a huge amount of information from these companies. We obviously aren't going to make any commitments to any companies, and certainly not give any money to any companies until the guardrails are firmly in place. But if we're trying to parallel process so we can move fast, so we thought it was prudent to start seeking information so that companies could get into a good position to apply while finalizing the guardrails. But obviously no commitments will be made to any companies until the guardrails are in place.
All right. Can you commit that no application will be approved or money sent out the door until the guardrails are finalized? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Second, the Department is standing up tracks to provide space situational awareness data. Isn't this reinventing the already existing system at the Pentagon? Very briefly.
No, no. We're working on, like you say, space situational awareness with the Pentagon, with an interagency, to track the commercial satellites and commercial space traffic. It's more congested in space. We have to prevent collisions and the like. So no, it's an interagency process, and I think it's necessary.
Okay. All right. The CHIPS and Science Act forbids companies from using CHIPS funds for stock buybacks. The CHIPS Act notice of funding opportunity, however, goes further. It asks applicants whether they plan to engage in any stock buybacks over the next 5 years and states that Commerce will, quote, evaluate applications based on the extent of the applicant's commitments to refrain from stock buybacks, unquote. Does that mean that Commerce will deny funding for applicants who plan to engage in any stock buybacks? And if not, then how should companies who engage in stock buyback in the normal course, what would they think about this provision?
No is the answer to your question. If you do buybacks, you are still eligible to receive the money. But look, as you know, the whole point of this program is for companies to invest in research and development, manufacturing in the United States. And so we're going to be tough on companies. Like, we want to see what are their investment plans, what are their research and development plans. They should be putting their money into investing in America and research and development in America, so we protect taxpayer money. We can't be giving them money so they can go give it to their shareholders to make more money. This is money to race ahead for investments in semiconductor industry in our country. So it's not a prohibition, but it is a signal to industry that we are serious, that this is not about padding their bottom line. This is about enhancing their ability to innovate in America.
Well, I have one more question, but I'm out of time, about fluorotechnology and PFAS, but I will submit that for the record. And so at this time, I would like to recognize the ranking member from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary. It's great to see you here, and I appreciated the time to talk to you earlier about health and safety for workers in the chip industry. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Silicon Valley has been the home of chip manufacturing for many years. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's helped build the valley. On the other hand, there has sometimes been a downside. Multiple studies in the 1980s and 90s found that women working at microelectronics manufacturing sites had miscarriages at twice the expected rate, and although the industry has made significant strides in terms of the use of hazardous chemicals, in some cases there is no alternative for a hazardous chemical in the manufacturing, and in that case special care must be made to prevent exposure to the workforce. I'll just note that this is from an OSHA missive, and I'll read it. OSHA's mandatory PELs remain in effect. However, OSHA recommends that employers consider using the alternative occupational exposure limits because the agency believes that exposures above some of these alternative occupational exposure limits may be hazardous to workers even when the exposure levels are in compliance with OSHA standards. And in fact, it's the EPA standards in those cases that need to be applied. I'll just say this: I appreciate your willingness to work with me on this. I look forward to vigorously engaging with you to see how we can get the great benefit of the CHIPS Act, but also protect our workforce. Let me ask another question. There's a company in California, not in my district, with an important question that has broad policy implications. This company never offshored, and so as a consequence, their costs were higher because labor costs are higher in the United States. They are worried that they might be at a disadvantage in the selection process because of their higher cost structure. What's the department's general view on using the loan program to use U.S.-only semiconductor manufacturers to refinance existing debt if it results in additional capital investments in the United States? What's the view on using the loan program to allow U.S.-only semiconductor manufacturers to use loans for purposes of funding operational and workforce development costs? And is there concern about the higher cost structure disadvantaging them in the competition accurate?
Yeah. So a couple reactions, mindful of time. On your first point, I am totally committed to working with you like we talked about. These are necessary. These companies use a lot of chemicals. Necessarily, it's heavily chemical based. And as you say, sometimes OSHA isn't enough. So let's figure out better ways to work with companies to
Absolutely.
secure health and safety. Secondly, the answer is yes. We look well upon using loan authority and grant authority to help small companies, U.S.-based companies, to defray the additional cost associated with the cost of U.S. labor. I would say, in a way, that's the point of this whole program. I mean, the truth of it is, you come from Silicon Valley, that's where all semiconductors once were, and then it was in search of cheap labor that these companies all went to Taiwan, China, Malaysia, et cetera. That's the point of this subsidy, to allow American companies and American workers, stay in this business, accounting for the fact that it is more expensive. So I'd say we're going to look. I have assembled an amazingly talented team. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal about it a few months ago. I'd welcome any of you to come over to the department to meet this team. We have some top-notch investment people, a top-notch loan expert. We're going to be as creative as possible to stretch the money as much as we can to help American businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired, and I yield back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just slightly off that topic, regarding NOAA's misguided East Coast vessel speed rule regarding the North Atlantic right whales. We had heard from NOAA that one or less whales on average per year have been killed by boats. And I'm wondering why the administration would move forward with releasing the proposed rule later this year, and then next year hold a workshop on how technology can help protect the whales. It seems like they're putting the cart before the horse.
So one thing I've learned since being Commerce Secretary is that the most complicated issues aren't semiconductor technology, it's the fish issues. And I would be very happy, coming from the ocean state myself, to come back to you on that, sir, and give you, a proper answer, and I'll have Dr. Spinrad, who runs NOAA, get in touch with you. But I will say this, I am personally sympathetic to both sides. We have to, preserve the environment and protect the whales, but also I know a lot of people make a living as fishermen, and so let me come back to you with a better answer.
Yeah, as the former governor, I wouldn't expect that you would like the way they rule out, and so I appreciate that answer.
Yeah, it's complicated. They're often subject to lawsuits. So permit me to come back to you.
I'll do that. What specific steps is the Department of Commerce taking to protect American interests at standard bodies where China has flooded them with high rates of participants and submissions?
I worry a lot about this. We have a whole working group inside of Commerce at NIST just focused on showing up at standards bodies. And exactly what you say. It sounds, not sexy and boring, except when the Chinese write the standards to favor them, then we get locked out. And so I have put a huge priority on reinvigorating our presence at standard-setting bodies all over the world. One little example I'll give you is we were successful in getting the American chairperson of the ITU, the Telecommunications Union, because the Russians were backing an alternative, and we won, and that's because we focused on it and put a campaign in place because, standards really matter.
Well, you just answered my next three questions, so, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. And now I'd like to recognize Ms. Bonamici from Oregon.
Thank you to the chair. Thank you to the ranking member. Thank you, Madam Secretary. It's good to see you. The CHIPS and Science Act is making historic investments in U.S. semiconductor manufacturing, in supply chain improvements, and in cutting-edge research and development. Now, the ranking member said she represents the Silicon Valley. I represent Silicon Forest, and as the representative of the Silicon Forest, I'm excited for the opportunities. And it was a pleasure to host you in Oregon, Madam Secretary, where we heard from students at Portland Community College and learned how they are preparing to enter the workforce. PCC has a program called Quick Start, in which they partner with the semiconductor leaders, like Intel, for example, to provide skills-based training for the next generation of the semiconductor workforce. So, Madam Secretary, we need more pathways for people to enter the growing semiconductor and advanced manufacturing industries. So what workforce education programs is the department investing in to meet the R&D goals of CHIPS? And how can Congress and the department make these programs accessible to more diverse learners, including rural and underserved communities?
Yeah, so great question, and I love visiting. We had a great visit, and I was blown away by what I saw at the community college. I should tell you, if you were to say to me what keeps you up at night, it's a long list, but the workforce is something that I worry about. Right now, there's about 100,000, there's a need for industry to have 100,000 semiconductor technicians. And that number is going to go up to about 300,000 pretty quickly. Technicians don't need a 4-year college degree. The community college is a perfect training ground, maybe a high school plus a credentialing program. So we're doing a few things. As you know, we're going to stand up the NSTC. That'll have a whole workforce component. We encourage universities and community colleges to hook into that. For every CHIPS applicant, every company that applies, we're requiring them to give us a workforce plan. So what are you going to do? We're asking states, I'm calling governors myself and convening governors to say, invest your state money into workforce programs, including community colleges. The NSF has a couple $100 million. So anyway, long story short, every single thing we're doing, whether it's the CHIPS money or the R&D money or outreach, it's to try to get states to put skin in the game so we can do this. I'll tell you some good news. We already have over 50 community colleges that we know of that have put out new training programs related to the semiconductor industry.
That's exciting.
So we just got to keep going.
I don't want to cut you off, but I want to get another question in. So for a prepared and diverse workforce ready to implement the Act, there must be access to high-quality, affordable childcare.
Yes.
And I'm hearing this across Northwest Oregon and across the country. Under your leadership, the department is pioneering the requirement that CHIP applicants must or should, depending on the size of the award, provide childcare for their workers, and I appreciate this commitment because of the serious challenges in the care economy. So, Madam Secretary, what criteria will the department use to evaluate the accessibility and quality of these childcare services, and how will the department encourage applicants to partner with a diverse range of providers like Early Head Start or home-based childcare services?
Yeah. So we're asking every company to show us their workforce plan, including a child care plan. There's no one-size-fits-all. It'll be different in every state, but it's exactly what you say. You can't hire the workers you need unless women can work, and that's not going to happen unless there's child care that's affordable. I'm not doing that because it's a social issue. It's a business issue. You talk to any CEO, and they tell you the same thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. And, Mr. Chairman, as I yield back, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record a brief from the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at UC Berkeley on implementing the CHIPS child care requirement and supporting good-paying early childhood education jobs. And also, Mr. Chairman and colleagues, this is a good investment in our future to invest in our children. They will be the next generation of semiconductor workforce, and I yield back.
Without objection, so ordered. I would now like to introduce, Mr. Garcia, the gentleman from California, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Madam Secretary, good to see you again. Thanks for coming in. I respect and I agree with your comments. I think the biggest threat to the CHIPS Act is the workforce right now. If we can't figure out how to get that right, so applaud the efforts. We need all hands on deck, all demographics, both sexes, and everyone to max participate to support this. I want to thank you again for taking the time before the CHIPS was brought to the floor for a vote to help me get comfortable with the requirements, the diligence that you're putting into making sure Mr. Chair, we spent several hours in the skiff with the Secretary's team as well as some corporate subject matter experts to make sure that we're porting over the requirements list to the DoD applications, because it would be a terrible thing to build semiconductor chips for refrigerators and cars only to find out that we have no industrial base to service the hypersonics, the exotic weapons that we need in a fight against China. So I'd like for you to touch on that, Madam Secretary. And I also want to thank you. We are getting actually very positive feedback from local industry partners in my district in Southern California from your team. The engagements that you've had, that you described, have been fruitful, and I think, I know it's early, but the feedback is very positive, so I appreciate the execution on that. And then last, before I hand it to you, just in the interest of time, we had talked about over the phone a couple of months ago supporting you with an initiative, this trade fight that we're in with China, this macro issue that we have with China being the biggest threat to the United States right now as a pure adversary. We have to figure out how to get to some sort of reciprocal trade agreement. I think you and I share that opinion. I just want to reiterate that I'm at your disposal. I am happy to pull together a bipartisan group of folks. And I know, folks like Mike Gallagher on the China Select Committee, both sides of the aisle, to come together to help enable you in that process. It's a long-term, problem, I know, and the answers aren't easy, but I think it's important that we do get together and start bending the arc towards a reciprocal trade agreement. China is doing to us right now things that we should not tolerate, but if we're going to allow them to do it, we should at least be able to do it to them and have access to their markets, their intellectual property. The agreement should be fair and balanced and reciprocal, and I think you understand and appreciate that. The last thing, so if you can talk to the requirements, and then I also want you to just touch on briefly your level of satisfaction. I know it's not related to chips, but are you okay with the way Treasury right now is currently managing and making sure that we are enforcing the sanctions against Russia relative to the Ukraine conflict? If you can touch on those two things. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning. Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
On the defense industrial base, one, I guess, update, I think, since the last time I saw you, is that we've executed an MOU with the Defense Department to share information and work together on exactly this issue. So we get from DoD what are the defense industrial base chips needs to make sure that, as you say, what we are incentivizing fulfills those needs. So I feel good about that. It's progress, and we're working very closely with the DoD and the intelligence community.
That's great.
So that's a good update. Reciprocity to China, I'm going to come sit with you because I only have a minute now. I'll just say when I was in China, I was very clear that, Alipay and UnionPay do business in the United States. Visa and MasterCard cannot. Their autonomous vehicle companies are piloting on our roads right now. We cannot. Their media companies every day are submitting content in the United States. We cannot.
That's right.
It's a long list. It's not fair. Enough is enough. Let's level the playing field. And so I think there's a lot. I'll come visit with you after my trip, and maybe we could talk about it. On Russia, that Secretary Yellen and the whole team, I think, is doing a fantastic job under really difficult circumstances. The thing I'm focused on is the export controls. I'll be honest, it is a brutal day-to-day fight. Every time we find out that they're going around our export controls, we come down on them, but it's a little like a whack-a-mole. Russia has been putting these global networks together for decades. They're good at getting around us, and I'd like to think we're even better about stopping it. So my point of it is, it's vigilance. You got to take it to it every day with vigilance. And that's what we're doing with the export controls.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, now I'd like to recognize Ms. Stevens from Michigan.
Thank you. Good morning. It's so nice to see you, Madam Secretary. And as I was thinking about today's hearing, I was reflecting on the incredible workforce at the Department of Commerce. And I know that you have been busy setting up a team, the CHIPS team, CHIPS for America team, within the department itself and at NIST, and it's just a remarkable set of people who are implementing a very historic endeavor, and I'm going to take you up on your offer to come by and sit down with the investment crew and some of the other folks that are working on the initiative. But I did just want to ask you a couple of questions. One is about open source central processing units, the CPUs. As you know, anyone in the world can contribute instructions to the design of open source CPUs, which then can be used for electronic products. And currently, there aren't requirements or regulations to ensure that open source CPUs have not had any instructions added by actors like China and Russia. I know Mr. Garcia was just talking to you about export controls. So if you have any reflections on open source CPUs, in addition to what you just shared about export controls, we are all ears. Also, we saw that the CCP came down with some restrictions on gallium and germanium. Gallium is used in the microelectronic components of many electronics, and germanium poses many military applications critical to our national defense. And so, given these developments, what industrial policy initiatives has the department considered? Maybe a CHIPS-like initiative for rare minerals that you could implement if we want to draft another kind of CHIPS 2.0 type of legislation surrounding germanium in particular, given how critical that's going to be to to the CHIPS implementation. And then lastly, if you have any other comments around the CHIPS office and the R&D facilities, that the commercial opportunities for R&D facilities that you're going to put forward. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so on the gallium and germanium, that seems clear to me that's their tit for tat sort of retaliation. And I think, we're not going to be scared by that. We need to do what we're going to do to protect our national security, period. And we have allies around the world who can provide some of those critical minerals to us, or as you say, we can innovate here. I would welcome the opportunity to work with you or everybody to sit down and make a plan around critical minerals. What are the most important critical minerals for products we need for our national security, like chips? And if we can't, mine them or process them in our own country, then where else besides China in the world can we? Because we can't be held hostage, and so I would welcome that.
Great.
The CHIPS team, I've been in government now as an executive for more than a dozen years. This CHIPS team is like nothing I've ever created. It's over 100 people, really top talent, working 7 days a week. I'm very proud of them. It's a hard job, so we'll welcome your engagement. On the research and development, this fall, I would say in general, this fall, we will have big announcements on tech hubs, Recompete, NSTC, R&D. The bill passed a year ago. We've been working like crazy. In the next few months, you're going to see announcements on all of that. And we want to work with, whoever in Michigan or any of your states, nonprofit, for-profit, that we think can add to the innovation ecosystem.
Great. Thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for appearing before us today. I have two questions. The first is on the RAN, the Radio Access Network. The CHIPS and Science Act contained funding for grants that could help increase supplier diversity in the wireless industry by supporting open radio access networks, the RAN. Can you give us your thoughts on the program, on how these funds can help scale new commercial-ready Open RAN vendors? And what is at stake if these funds aren't quickly deployed to help spur the development and deployment of Open RAN wireless networks?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, as you say, there's $1.5 billion in the CHIPS Act for ORAN. I would say I think it's vitally, critically important because we need secure 5G and 6G networks. And to protect ourselves. And one way to do that, to bring down the cost, is to have them be open. So we put out the first money in August of this year. We put out $5.5 million for the first awards. We're going to put more money out later this fall. We're very engaged with industry. I've actually been meeting myself with the wireless carriers. That's the key, I think, to get the carriers to be open to embracing this instead of just working with incumbent hardware providers. So I think it's a critical innovation for our national security, and I'm actually grateful that Congress put that money in the bill.
And I thank you, and we'll work with you to continue to expedite that. So I thank you so much for your answer. My next question deals with semiconductor manufacturing tax credits. Without going into too much detail on Section 48D, just wanted to let you know what we were talking about. Earlier this year, Commerce issued proposed guidance for the CHIPS Act's grant programs that defined semiconductor as semiconductor devices only, and defined semiconductive substances such as polysilicon as material. The Department of Treasury unfortunately relied on this narrow definition in their proposed regulations for implementing the Act's tax credits, excluding investments in U.S. polysilicon manufacturing and other facilities in the supply chain from qualifying for the credit. I feel that without domestic polysilicon ingot wafer manufacturing, we won't be able to build out our domestic semiconductor manufacturing supply chain. So my question, Madam Secretary, is will you commit to working with the Department of Treasury to issue final regulations that correctly define semiconductor to include semiconductive substances such as polysilicon and wafers, which represent critical parts of the semiconductor manufacturing supply chain?
So let me say, as you correctly say, this is in Treasury's wheelhouse. But yes, I will work with you and Secretary Yellen to look at this issue, recognizing that my authority relates more to the grant program, and Secretary Yellen is in charge of the 25% ITC. But I hear you. We can follow up, and we can talk to the Secretary's team.
Thank you, because with that narrow definition, it does exclude a lot of things that are critically important, in my view, to creating that domestic supply chain. And I think what Treasury did is they respectfully, incorrectly latched on to a very narrow definition, which we'd like to see expanded and broadened. And I thank you, and with that, I yield back.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now the gentleman from New York. I'd like to recognize Mr. Bowman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Madam Secretary. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your tremendous work. I'm concerned about the recompetes program. In my district, there are many historically marginalized, underserved, redlined, under-resourced communities that lack the infrastructure to go after some of the grant money that is available as part of the recompetes program. What are your thoughts in terms of supporting these historically marginalized communities and building the infrastructure and accessing the resources that are necessary to create jobs in, like you mentioned earlier, 100K shortage in semiconductor tech jobs that these communities could really benefit from? Can you speak to how to provide more on-the-ground support for historically marginalized communities?
So it's a great question, and the whole point of the Recompete program is to make investments in communities that have been historically behind, and our plan is to run an open, merit-based process, then to pick a handful of places to make fairly significant investments, because I know from experience, if you're starting, with nothing, you need some critical mass, which requires a big investment. We are providing every bit of technical assistance that we can to help communities to apply. This is an initiative that's got a couple of steps in the application process, and we're really trying to provide technical assistance. That being said, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is tough. I know in Rhode Island, the communities that they are left behind as a result, they don't have much of the infrastructure. They don't have a planning team. They don't have money to hire a lawyer to submit the grant. So we're doing what we can to recognize that. But in your case or anyone's case, if you have a community that you think is worthy with some money, could be successful, then we will reach out to you and we'll help you to help them to apply.
Thank you, and I'll have my office follow up with you on that because we definitely want to partner with you in that conversation. I had another question about regional tech hubs, regional tech and innovation hubs. So I was proud to contribute ideas to the bill about how we can bring minority and women-owned businesses and CDFIs to the table, and how we can use the hubs to promote employee ownership and cooperative business models. As you implement these programs, how are you approaching the challenge of building and actually keeping wealth in local communities, particularly vulnerable communities, as we just talked about? How do we make sure the benefits don't just go to large corporations and distant investors?
With tech hubs. So let me say something on the tech hub initiative. I've never seen anything like this oversubscribed. We were appropriated $500 million, and we have received over 400 applications. We are massively, massively, massively oversubscribed. 400 applications from 48 states and 3 territories. We are going through the applications. We're required by statute to designate at least 20, but that means, 380 disappointed places. And I can tell you, these are incredibly high-quality applications, so I suppose that's my way of saying I think at some point you should appropriate more money for this.
Yes.
Because it was authorized at $10 billion. We got $500 million. It's amazing what we're seeing, and this is the thing that allows us to compete with China, invest in America, and all of our technology and all of our communities. So the point of this recompete is for really distressed places. Tech hubs, not so much. Honestly, we want to find places that are really good at some technology, and we can take them from good to great. So I don't want you to think that this is for distressed communities. That being said, it's also not just for big companies. Actually, tech hubs, we want to be looking for the next generation. I don't think of it so much as big companies. CHIPS is big companies. This is for, like a startup ecosystem, an R&D ecosystem, a new innovative way of job training. So that's how we think about it. That's the purpose of it, and I think we'll get that right and make sure we get into every nook and cranny of the community.
Yeah, there's a company in my district, Seek, that works on superconductor-based technology, so I want to give them a shout-out as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And now the gentleman from California, I recognize Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, you have what some have considered to be the key cabinet position, because it's really a conglomerate of a lot of things that didn't necessarily go together, but Congress saw fit to bring them together. Conveniently and interestingly, we're here to talk about the CHIPS Act, but I think what's interesting is 2 of your key undersecretaries. Your undersecretary known as the BIS, and your undersecretary known as the director of the PTO. When you were in China just days ago, you were bushwhacked, to say the least, by the launch of a 5G phone and the proof that China has achieved 7 nanometer capability. That wasn't an accident. They chose you as an important symbol of their accomplishment. The tools that are at your disposal, one of them clearly to stop the export of technology that allows exactly what has just occurred to occur. The other one, though, is the one I want to focus on for a moment. Even though the Undersecretary for Intellectual Property, the PTO director, is somewhat independent, still falls under yours, and the coordination is uniquely yours as the Secretary. My question to you is, 3 of the top 10 patent recipients last year were Chinese. Only 1 was American. The reality is that Huawei, a company not able to do business in the United States, continues to receive often clandestinely through proxies, they continue to receive royalties because they are in fact patenting the technology. And there were a couple people that talked about trees and valleys. I'm from Telecom Gulch, San Diego. We are extremely concerned that your administration has to find a way to block in a different way. It's not just about a particular device going to China from LAM or some other entity. The reality is that if China is allowed to create blocking and revenue technology in 5G, in telecommunication, in a host of areas as they are, the patent system, both directly through real innovation and through what I would call AI blocking, in other words, coming up with patents that envision things that they haven't really reduced to practice, will be used against us to thwart us. What can you do with the combination of those and other tools?
Yeah. So let me say this. I would welcome to come sit with you if you have ideas for our consideration. We're trying to use every single tool at our disposal, BIS, enforcement, patents, to deny the Chinese an ability to, get intellectual property, to advance their technology in ways that can hurt us. I was obviously, I don't know what the right word, upset, when I saw the Huawei announcement. The only good news, is there is any, is we don't have any evidence that they can manufacture 7 nanometer at scale. And although I can't talk about any investigations specifically, I promise you this. Every time we find credible evidence that any company has gone around our export controls, we do investigate. But as it relates to IP, I'll come sit with you, or have Kathy Vidal come sit with you. If you have ideas for how we can tighten it up, I want to hear them.
Well, I have been able to meet with Kathy. I'd love to meet with you because during the time I left Congress for 2 years, my job was to try to figure out how to compete with Belt and Road. And we don't do it well because we don't coordinate the way China does in competing against us. I would like to see in technology that we do coordinate yours and other parts of the government. So I'll be happy to meet with you at your convenience.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And now the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Chairman Babin and Ranking Member Lofgren, for holding this very important hearing today. And thank you, Madam Secretary, for being with us. North Carolina's semiconductor industry boasts over 100 semiconductor and other electronic component manufacturing establishments, over 7,600 people employed in the sector, and $1.2 billion in exported product. The passage of the CHIPS and Science Act was critical in re-energizing the U.S. semiconductor production and maintaining America's technological global competitiveness. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST's extramural manufacturing programs are critical to supporting U.S. domestic manufacturing. And Congress authorized significant plus-ups for both the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and the Manufacturing USA program in the CHIPS and Science Act, with major support from the Biden-Harris administration. But as you know, Congress failed to appropriate funding to these programs at the level set in CHIPS and Science. So, Madam Secretary, could you talk about the opportunities that the United States is losing out on by not supporting the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and Manufacturing USA, and how would a decrease in funding to these programs affect domestic manufacturing?
Thank you for your question. So I think it's very significant. We talk a lot about securing our national security, competing with China. The exchange I just had with Congressman Issa relates to what we can do on defense. But my strongly held view is that what we do on offense matters so much more. There's only so much we can do. As you just said, China's coordinated, they're investing. We need to be coordinated and invest. And the reality is that over the past 30 years, this country has taken its eye off the ball of manufacturing. And when you don't manufacture, you lose out on innovation and you become dependent on other countries. So every investment we make in MEP MEP is a great program. You all have MEPs in your states. They are very well run. They help small companies to do innovation in manufacturing. They're the ones who are going to find, the next semiconductor manufacturing innovation, the next, interesting battery technology. And so I would say we're working hard on the Manufacturing USA. We're going to announce the topics this fall. There'll be a competition, merit-based. We'll stand it up next year. But yeah, any dollar that's shortchanging MEP or Manufacturing USA shortchanges America's national security and our ability to invest in our own manufacturing capacity.
Great. Final question, back to NIST. I know that the Department of Commerce, primarily through NIST, is looking to increase its investments in quantum information science. Where do you believe the Department of Commerce should focus its efforts for the next 5 years through the National Quantum Initiative?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that. A quantum expert I am not, but I will have Dr. Locascio and her team follow up with you. Okay,
and just to tell you why I think that's so important. Some of this we're doing catch-up, or we seeded our semiconductor stature to other countries when we put manufacturing there. On quantum, we can be the leaders, and we already are. Maybe Representative Fouché will ask about this, but if you've never been to the Duke Quantum Science Center to see what is going on for the future, it's amazing. So thank you.
No, thank you. I think we do. We lead the world in quantum. We lead the world in AI, and I will have Locascio follow up with you.
Thank you very much. And now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Madam Secretary. Appreciate you spending time with us here today. It's a very important topic, and I'd love to talk more about chips. Unfortunately, since I do have you present, I would like to follow up on something that our office has been trying to get some answers on for a while. And as much as we all are tired of talking about the topic, it concerns COVID. I hail from Central Florida. The hurricane hunters that fly for NOAA are in my hometown of Lakeland. And as a former naval aviator, I made it a career practice to avoid flying into storms, but was invited at a point to go flying with the hurricane hunters, and I was looking forward to doing that. Back in July, when I was going to do all the paperwork necessary to do that, I was surprised to find that I would have to supply my status of COVID vaccine status, and be willing to submit to a test or show proof that I didn't have COVID at the time. That kind of came as a surprise to me, considering that the administration had declared an end to the pandemic. And I should have done this before, but Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter I sent to the Secretary back in July, as well as the Department of Commerce's COVID-19 Workplace Safety Plan that was dated in July of 2023.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our staff started doing some research and finding out why would we still be requiring this? And as it turns out, I read in your department's own plan that the department does not require on-site contractor employees and visitors to provide information about their vaccine status at this time. Additionally, on-site contractor employees and visitors are not required to show proof of a negative COVID-19 test when entering in or a DOC facility, all Department of Commerce, regardless of their vaccine status. There's a disconnect there that I'm really puzzled about, because somewhere between your desk and the deck plate level, someone's decided to create their own policy. And in no way do I fault the folks who are at the tip of the spear trying to get this done. But 41 of my colleagues and I sent you a letter back in July asking for information about this. We still, I'm sure it's languishing in someone's inbox, but I am curious, why would NOAA still be requiring this at this time? Particularly an organization that's nothing but scientists who presumably are following the science every day.
So thank you for your question. Let me say a few things. First, I'm sorry we haven't replied yet. I'm constantly trying to get better and quicker at replying, and we'll get your reply this week. Secondly, I don't know, and I'll look into it. I do know, they're very close quarters in these hurricane hunters. They're tiny, and it could be that, but I'll get you a proper answer. Thirdly, I do want to take 10 seconds to say thank you to my team that operates these hurricane hunters. It's been an unbelievably busy season. We only have 2 hurricane hunters that can fly into the thick of the storm. You're braver than I. They've asked me to try it.
I don't fly into hurricanes.
And I'm not willing to
Right.
do that. But I am going to take this occasion to ask Congress for additional funding. We have 2 planes. They're old. We operate a fleet of 9 Hurricane Hunters. They are all old. They need maintenance. I had to take 1 down during a hurricane because of maintenance. So I'll get you proper answers to your questions, but I do want to say that team is working around the clock, and we need Congress's support to maintain this fleet.
No, I do fully support them, and I would support more resources for them. I do understand Miss Piggy was down, wasn't able to fly into the storm when we needed that data the most. I'm also concerned about the implications for NOAA staff. You know, our staff members of NOAA required to show vaccine status now, because that's also not in accordance with the administration. So I really would like to have those answers.
Yes, I'll get you the answers. We have a policy that is science-based, as you say, and so I'll follow up.
Very, very good. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Now, the gentleman from Illinois, I'd like to recognize Mr. Sorensen.
I want to thank the chairman and ranking member for convening the hearing, and Secretary Raimondo for your willingness to appear today. And just to continue on the subject, in my previous life I was a meteorologist, and so I really appreciate your support for those who put themselves in harm's way. Flying into the hurricane so that we have the data to better forecast where these killer storms are going to go. So I would invite you to come to our office so that I could help champion how we can find the funding for the Hurricane Hunter aircraft to protect lives and property.
Thank you.
The CHIPS and Science Act included $50 billion for CHIPS for America Fund, $39 billion for implementation for manufacturing incentive programs, and $11 billion for R&D and workforce development. $39 billion, that's a huge investment in chips manufacturing. However, the costs of manufacturing is very high, more than will be covered by this investment. We need industry to capitalize on the investments made in chips. In the last year, CHIPS Program Office has staffed up and released 2 Notice of Funding Opportunity announcements. One of those was for the $39 billion for the Semiconductors Financial Assistance Program, which has received hundreds of statements of inquiry. In your perspective, have the investments made through CHIPS and Science Act incentivized and catalyzed the investment of private capital in the CHIPS economy on the scale that we need?
So it's a great question. Yes. So let me say, although $39 billion is an enormous amount of taxpayer money, and it's an unprecedented program, it really is a drop in the bucket, relative to the mission we have to meet. Since the President signed the CHIPS and Science Act, there's been more than $300 billion of private investment announced into the semiconductor industry. So that's why I answer yes to your question. Like, if we continue to go on a path that for every dollar we invest, there's $10 or more of private capital, then, you know, I feel good about that. But it is necessary, which is why, you know, my job is to cut the best deal possible for the taxpayer,
Right.
to draw in as much private capital as possible.
How does our investment compare with China's investment today?
Much lower. Much lower. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but, you know, China, I think China I'll get to the exact number, but I think they have like a $145 billion fund just for semiconductors, and they've announced massive investments, state subsidies in legacy chips and mature node chips, so much lower. But, you know, our private sector is the envy of the world. You know, we're not a, you know, state-run economy, nor do we want to be one. So we will compete and win, and we're not going to go toe-to-toe with them for public money. We're going to out-innovate them and draw in private sector capital, which is why the question you're asking is so hard. So it's the right question, and we have to make sure it happens.
How do we make sure that we meet the workforce requirements when we go forward? I know that was brought up before. And how can Congress be part of the solution?
You know, I think Congress needs to continue to fund workforce. Workforce, apprenticeships, job training, these aren't social programs. These are essential business investments for America to compete. You know, when I think about, if you say to me, Secretary, what is success in implementing the CHIPS Act, it isn't just incentivizing a dozen new fabs. It's getting colleges and universities to put out 3 times as many engineers. It's getting, every community college in America to have a semiconductor technician certification program. It's getting high school students, to be taught vocational training and things that relate to the chip industry. So I say continue to fund it and don't look at it as a soft investment. It's actually every bit as important to invest in our people as it is in our tanks and missiles and, hardware.
Great. Appreciate that perspective, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Baird, gentleman from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for holding this session, and thank you for being here, Madam Secretary. We appreciate it. My question is, that among the requirements for those seeking CHIPS funding, they must comply with the NEPA, or the National Environmental Policy Act, and other environmental laws and other executive orders. So tying NEPA compliance to CHIPS funding means that any company applying through any of the funding opportunities, including the upcoming one focused on R&D, will need to navigate this process. And for some firms, that carrying out the environmental reviews is familiar. It is resource intensity, and the process is feeble given to the bandwidth and capital that they have at their disposal. However, the smaller businesses in the semiconductor materials and equipment sector, there's a real risk that the requirement to comply with NEPA may impact the disbursement of CHIPS funding and or slow down the pace of construction. So here's my question. How's the CHIPS Program Office working with its industry partners, particularly small business applicants, to assuage this concern? And how can the CHIPS Program Office work with state and local authorities to reduce the potential for duplicative compliance activities that might further delay the construction of new fabs of other manufacturing centers?
Thank you for your very important question. You're right. NEPA takes a long time. And so I have built a little team in the CHIPS office to do just NEPA, which is to say to provide help and assistance, technical assistance to applicants so they can have a NEPA plan which makes sense. I will say there is currently a bipartisan amendment to the Defense Authorization Act which would help a lot. So we're going to do everything we can with our own team to help streamline NEPA and move it as quickly as is prudent. But if Congress could pass the amendment, I think it's the Cruz-Kelly amendment in the Authorization Act, it would help us a lot to move faster. The other thing I wanted to say is in the way we're implementing CHIPS is we're trying to incentivize states plus with the permitting. And so, for example, we've encouraged states, governor's offices, to put in place a single point of contact on permitting for CHIPS. So there's just like in the governor's office a CHIPS permitting team, because that's what we're trying to, like you just said, streamline between the feds and the state requirements, and we're giving like a +1 to states that actually do that. There's no easy solution on this. I worry about it myself. And like I said, I have a very good team of NEPA experts trying to, work the system properly so that we get it done as quickly as we can.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I got to give a shout out to my alma mater, Purdue University. They're working, doing a lot of work in this CHIPS area. They've gone from a small little wafer to up to an 18-inch wafer now to make the chips. So, and they're training these young people and students. So I just want to give them a shout out for the good work in the CHIPS area.
So I'm smiling because one of the best visits I've taken in my tenure was to Purdue. I mean, I've loved all my visits, but Mitch Daniels is a friend of mine, former governor, and what he did there was amazing. But I spent the day at Purdue, and I even went to a CHIPS job fair at Purdue, and I got to meet some of the professors there, what they're doing in chips. It's like right on target. If every community did that in this country, there'd be no stopping us.
Mitch Daniels is my friend too, but anyway, Purdue, we would really appreciate you taking the time to be there.
Yeah, I've already been once. It was a great trip, and happy to go back.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Salinas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you and the ranking member for holding this hearing, and thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for taking the time to speak with us today. So just before we get started on some of my questions that relate back to my district, you mentioned a lot of announcements coming this fall, and I know a lot of the money has already been, the funding has been appropriated, but how would a shutdown, a government shutdown, actually affect all the rollouts and timelines that you are facing right now?
It would be crushing. You know, when I talk to members of Congress, they say, how come you're not moving faster on chips? You know, where's this, where's that? We are literally working 7 days a week to go as fast as we can. If there is a shutdown, it'll come to a grinding halt. I mean, there is no question in my mind that a shutdown will hurt America's national security, at least as it relates to my work. Export control enforcement, export control work, investment of the CHIPS money, investment of the Tech Hub money, it all stops. And every dollar and every day that we aren't working, you know, puts us greater at risk.
Thank you. And as we know, as Oregon is not only home to Intel and companies like Lam Research, which is actually in my district, and they manufacture chips as well, we host a significant manufacturing hub that contributes to the semiconductor supply chain. And these are really good paying jobs. And I hear from these smaller companies, though, machinists, for example, that it was a huge shock for their businesses when chip fabrication initially started moving overseas. And in some cases, these businesses took many years to recover, and they may hesitate to fully jump back in because of that experience. So as we look to jumpstart this essential industry, how should we be thinking long-term about the supports to ensure that this isn't just a one-off investment, but that we are really bringing this industry and these jobs back permanently for the long haul?
Yeah. I think a few things. We need to embrace innovation, including artificial intelligence, which will bring down the cost of a lot of this production in a way that it could enable us to keep it in the United States. The other thing is that's why we, honestly, that is why we have the CHIPS initiative. It is, you know, much more expensive to build one of these huge facilities in the U.S. relative to Asia, and that's why I think this is a good investment, right? Like, we want to pay workers a good wage in America. We want labor standards. We need environmental standards. So we can't back away from high standards. We need to innovate to bring down costs, and then, you know, that's why I think it's appropriate in this case for the government to have a program of this kind. I also will tell you, as I talk to big customers of semiconductors, I won't name names, but, you know, companies that consume huge quantities of chips, they're increasingly willing, in some cases, to pay more for U.S. made, because they see how vulnerable they are when they buy all of these chips from, say, one country in Asia. So if they can pay a premium to have U.S.-made chips, you know, I think they're increasingly willing to do that because it adds business value.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. As you know, the CHIPS and Science Act appropriated $11 billion for R&D activities, including the creation of the National Semiconductor Technology Center, as you mentioned earlier. Oregon's existing infrastructure in chips, including everything from cutting-edge research to the manufacturing supply chain to high-volume fabrication capacity, uniquely positions the state to serve as a hub for domestic R&D. How are you thinking about leveraging existing resources, such as Oregon's leading-edge and high-volume manufacturing capabilities and our extensive supply chain, to maximize NSTC investments?
We are thinking of doing that. So what we envision is creating a whole network. The NSTC, we want to be a neutral, science-based place or series of places that existing universities, tech hubs, networks, like you say, can kind of hook into. So the point of it is to tap into what exists, invest into it so it grows, and like if we succeed, the NSTC will be this place that, as it says, is neutral and is science-based so that all institutions feel comfortable interacting with it.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. McCormick.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Ms. Secretary, for being here with us today. It's limited, so I'll get right to the point. Space Policy Directive 3 transferred the responsibility for civilian space situational awareness from the Pentagon to the Department of Commerce. From what I understand is, since it's transferred away from the Pentagon, most other agencies that are monitoring have been using commercialized monitoring, but you're kind of developing your own system itself. How's that going to differ from the Pentagon, and why not rely on the commercial industry rather than creating your own, kind of which seems duplicitous and fairly expensive?
Yeah, great question. So we are going to work with the Pentagon, and we will absolutely leverage commercial capacity. And we haven't made any specific plans. We're still, working in the interagency, including with the Pentagon, to finalize this. All of that being said, there's a need for a space situational awareness, program, not that different from, FAA and air traffic control, to keep track of the commercial congestion in space, of the commercial satellites. Space is becoming, a lot of traffic, very congested, which increases probability of collision, danger, et cetera.
So I know we're real short on time.
Yeah,
specifically, like we have places like Leo Labs and stuff like that, people who are kind of doing that already, and they actually have broader access to more locations than we would have, which we'd have to recreate in the department. My question is, why not use those civilian agencies and that coordination between commercial instead of recreating your own infrastructure, which would seem to be much more expensive?
We will work with them, but we think it's necessary for the federal government to have our own, proprietary system.
Okay. I want to talk real quick about China and the massive satellite launches that they have right now. They're going to be at basically the same kind of orbit, the Leo orbit. I think of somewhere around 13,000 that they've asked to launch up to space, and how we're going to track that. Basically, my question is, what is the Department of Commerce doing to establish data sharing and transparency to keep all that in a safe space, given our limited ability to share information right now? China's not playing ball, and they're not allowing us to track in the same way. And we can't just rely on radar tracking. I know it's going to get harder as people come up with new technologies and stuff like that. How do we force their hands to kind of come to the table and share the information to keep our space, especially on Leo, from being on a collision course?
Yeah. Let me do this. My Deputy Secretary, Don Graves, along with Rich Dalbello, who runs Space Commerce, can give you a much better answer, a more detailed answer to that on Leo. So let me connect you with them and come back to you with a proper answer.
It's complex questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Final complex question. I'm very, very interested in the AI production, the actual hardware that we're producing in Taiwan. You mentioned the Opening CHIPS Act. And that we rely heavily on the hardware that's produced in Taiwan. China says, we're going to take Taiwan. I take them for the word. If they do, what then? We're 2 years away from even, once you break ground, it takes 2 years to build that kind of capacity locally. Yeah. Would we have to then, do we have a way to keep them from getting that technology and actually reverse engineering and actually having the capability to produce it and not give it to us? If they take in other words, are we going to have to destroy those places in place? How do we keep us on even keel or even ahead where we belong, given that our entire capacity for production is in Taiwan right now?
Yeah. My answer to that question is I have to do everything every single day to go as fast as possible to increase domestic manufacturing. I don't know. I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals about what China will and won't do and when they'll do it. I know that we are vulnerable. We buy all of those chips you're talking about, the AI chips, the leading edge chips, all of them. None of them are made in America right now, which is why I've got to work like crazy every day to bring that manufacturing home as fast as we can. There's no shortcut around that because we need them at scale. Like AI consumes massive numbers of chips. It's not like you can make a small number of chips for AI. So unfortunately, the only solution, at least that I can think of, is move faster in America and build fabs in America to produce those chips at scale.
I'll close with this, just saying that I think the CHIPS Act kind of didn't address that fully, that we really don't have that production capability, nor do we even have a plan to, the plants haven't started being built here for the AI chips, and I'm really worried about that. Thanks. With that, I'll close.
Okay, thank you, and I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman, Ms. Fushi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Loughran, for holding this meeting today. And Secretary Raimondo, it is good to see you again. Thank you for being willing to appear before us again today. I was proud to join you and President Biden earlier this year in North Carolina's 4th, which is my district, for the President's first stop on the Investing in America tour. And I thank you for talking with us about the success of CHIPS in science and where we're heading. I am proud that in my district, it includes the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, who leads the Accelerate North Carolina Life Sciences Manufacturing Coalition, a recipient and winner of the Economic Development Agency's Build Back Better Regional Challenge. This funding has helped to dramatically increase the capacity of the state's education system to prepare North Carolina residents for high-quality, well-paying jobs, and expands entry-level biotechnology training programs at 10 community colleges across the state. North Carolina Central University in my district is also leading a network of the state's HBCUs and one historically American Indian university to establish 6 training hubs. How do you believe these tech hubs programs will complement the efforts of the CHIPS office to reinvigorate the U.S. domestic semiconductor manufacturing sector?
Good morning. Nice to see you. They're meant to work together. They're meant to work together. If we do this right, the NSTC, which we just talked about, will work with Manufacturing USA, the MEPs, the tech hubs. As I said, I've been blown away by, we have 400 tech hub applications from 48 states, really high quality applications. So if we do it right, we'll have a whole web all over America with different, investing in different parts of the supply chain, in space, in quantum, in artificial intelligence, in biotechnology, feeding, planting seeds of innovation all over the place, which then will help our biggest companies, for example, like a company like Intel that'll be making these chips, to be that much, more successful and innovative. So what we're trying to build is like a whole ecosystem of the workforce, the research and development, and the actual manufacturing.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure you've heard from many corners now that everyone wishes you just hurry up and get the money out the door.
It's true.
After all, reshoring our semiconductor manufacturing capacity was a sufficiently urgent national priority to rally bipartisan support to enact the CHIPS and Science Act and to provide the $50 billion in funding. At the same time, we want and need you to get this right. Can you assure us you are doing everything you can to move as quickly as possible to get the funding out the door? And can you please talk about the timeline for additional funding opportunities and where you see the future of the CHIPS program heading?
So, look, I feel the pressure. I promise you that. I know we have to move fast. Fast is the conversation we just had. We are behind. But it is more important that we get it right. And if we take another month or a few more weeks to get it right, I will defend that because it's necessary. By the way, a shutdown sets us back in a huge way. Sending people home and slowing down our work, that would be a huge problem. So yes, I assure you we're moving as fast as we can, and we're doing everything we can to achieve the national security goals that were intended to be achieved by the statute. The next phase, I think that what I've said is the CHIPS program is about manufacturing, but we also have to think about advanced packaging happening in the United States. It's an interesting thing that, we can make all the chips in America, but if we then send them to Asia to be tested and packaged, that's a problem. So we have to package in the United States. We have to do the research and increase research and development in the United States. And a comment, I forget who asked me, we got to bring down the cost of manufacturing chips. That happens through innovation. So when you say what comes next, I think that's what has to come next. Bending the cost curve so this can be sustainable in the United States.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Now the gentleman from California, recognize Mr. Obernolte.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thanks for the testimony today. This is a topic that's very important to me and I think to everyone on this dais. I'd like to ask about something that you just brought up. Since you brought it up, the issue of packaging. That's something that I also have been very concerned about because obviously if we can't construct the packaging for these chips and use that to dissipate the heat from them and incorporate them into integrated circuit boards, it doesn't matter where they're made. If we're not doing the packaging here domestically, that represents an equally potent threat to our supply chain. And yet, as you remarked, nearly all of that packaging is currently done overseas. I think all of our U.S. chip manufacturers do their packaging overseas, by and large. I think 81% of the world's packaging is done in Asia. So I think that this is a really potent threat. I know that this is something we've all been talking about. Part of the Chips and Sciences Act establishes a national advanced packaging manufacturing program and dedicated $2.5 billion to get that spun up. Can you give us an update on that and your confidence level that we can solve the packaging problem at the same time we solve the chip manufacturing problem?
Yeah. My confidence level is high because we have to. Right? Like we have no choice. And relative to the question before, it's going to require a lot of private sector capital. In our plan, in our strategy plan, our strategy paper, which we put out earlier this year, we would like to have multiple high-volume advanced packaging facilities in the United States. So several, like I say, advanced packaging. As you well know, you're expert in this, there's some, I hate to use the word like commodity packaging. I'm not sure, how much of that will be in the U.S., but certainly the leading edge packaging, the most sophisticated packaging, that's essential for the future. Chips can only get so small. I'm not a scientist, but what I understand is we're coming to the end of Moore's Law, and chips can only get so small, which means it's all the special sauce is in the packaging, and we have to have that in America, period, and I think we will, and we're focused on it.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Talking about what you just brought up again, the fact that we're reaching some of the theoretical limits of our ability to create faster chips using silicon, that highlights the fact that silicon is not the only semiconductor out there, and there's increasing interest in other semiconductors, particularly semiconductors such as indium phosphide, that are optical semiconductors with higher electron velocities than silicon. And those will probably be very useful in applications like quantum computing, which I know is something that we're all very interested in making sure that the U.S. retains a leadership role on. So I was a little alarmed to hear the efforts recently of Huawei in establishing scale production of indium phosphate at locations such as the Wuhan Optics Valley in China. Do we have a plan to dedicate some of the CHIPS funding to increase the production of these optical semiconductors in the United States?
Yes. I don't know. I just made a note, and I'll have my team follow up with you. I don't know precisely, which areas, but I can promise you we're very focused on it, whether it's indium phosphate or silicon carbide. We're trying to stimulate the innovation. Like we just had a meeting on it the other day, and we're saying we got to go to where the puck is going, not where it is now, which is what you're talking about. So yes, I am confident that we are evaluating all those future technologies and incorporating that into the way we're going to invest the incentives.
Right. I'm glad to hear it. Let's continue that discussion. Thanks for being here today. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jackson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
There are 3 members from North Carolina in this committee. You've heard from 2 of them. They were there.
Yes, I saw.
Yeah. Representative Foushee and Representative Ross both represent part of the Research Triangle, which already has a wonderful reputation for being a tech hub, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. I represent a new district that was just created in the last census, that's the Charlotte region. And part of my job up here is to tell a new story for that region, to update people's understanding, because we have earned a reputation as our own tech center for a lot of different reasons. One of the nation's leading financial centers, and on and on. You said that part of your job is to get the best possible deal for the taxpayer. I want you to do that, but would be remiss if I didn't use this opportunity to use my voice to update in your thinking what this region means, what it means to the state, and what it means to the country, because it's just grown a heck of a lot. And it already is a tech hub, and would surely benefit from official recognition as such. I think we all know what success looks like for the CHIPS Act 20 years from now. I think we can have a vision of what a successful semiconductor industry, a mature semiconductor industry looks like. My question is, what does success look like 5 years from now? What are the markers that tell you that this is headed in the right direction? My sense is that the CHIPS Act shouldn't best be understood as an industry subsidy, but as an industry catalyst.
Exactly.
Because we don't have the money to continue to subsidize this industry as the Chinese government would. So we have to light a very expensive spark, and that spark has to catch fire. Now, you've given me a couple of possible metrics that you might be tracking here. Workforce is one, cost of manufacturing going down is another, private sector investment, maybe the biggest. So 5 years from now, what do you want to see that's going to give you confidence that this spark has produced a flame?
Yeah, I mean, that was so well said, and I appreciate it. First, let me say this on tech hubs. We're committed to supporting every tech hub that's designated, which is to say we have a very limited amount of money. Not every tech hub will get the money. Some of the ones that are designated will, some of them won't. But we are working on ways that we can use existing funds in the Commerce Department and across the government to support the tech hubs that are designated. So when you said you'd appreciate being designated, I wanted everyone to know we're going to put our back into supporting all the designees, even the ones that don't get a tech hub money. Second thing, here's what I think. 5 years from now, if we do our job right, we will have in construction facilities to do, at least 2 facilities to do leading edge chip manufacturing. Same thing for leading edge packaging. I mean, actually, in 5 years from now, they should be up and running, more than in construction. So we should have new at-scale fabs producing leading-edge chips in the United States. Same thing for packaging. Same thing for advanced memory at scale. The NSTC will be established. There'll be several centers around the country doing research and development. We'll have a fund established to make investments in smaller companies, and we'll have 1 or more manufacturing USAs up and running. So I think that the 5-year mark is a really important mark, because it's the time that these fabs should be coming online, and we should be making these chips at scale. The last thing I'll say is, if we do our job right with all of the workforce, we'll start to see like a totally new way of training people to do these semiconductor jobs. And it's not just semiconductors, they're technicians, cyber technicians and such. So it's a grand vision, and I think 5 or 6 years we will have achieved a lot of that.
Thank you. I yield back.
All right, thank you very much. And now the recognized gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Tinney.
Thank you, Chairman Babin and Ranking Member Loughran, and thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for being here. I am just so privileged to represent New York's 24th District, which has a strong history of tech. We have IBM, Corning in upstate New York, The Erie Canal is really one of the first regions to really bring us into the Industrial Revolution. But unfortunately, upstate New York has suffered tremendously because of Chinese-based entities flooding our market with over-subsidized cheap goods. Many of our strong domestic manufacturing has moved overseas. And we've lost industry jobs and brought on huge mass outmigration in New York, as everyone knows. We were the ones that kind of got this started. North Carolina's kind of taken over. But we do have an opportunity now to bring manufacturing, and especially the high-tech semiconductor manufacturing research here. We're really excited about the advent of the new Micron announcement, the facility coming in Clay, New York. We think it's a great first step. But I want to ask you, I want to talk about, first of all, the Buffalo. You talked about the hubs and some of the tech hubs that were going to be funded potentially. My district spans across all of upstate New York. It's a huge, long district. I go from the Buffalo region to Rochester, Syracuse, all the way to Watertown, circling Lake Ontario. So Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse have come together. We're doing this as a regional approach. The New York Smart I-Corridor Tech Hub, it's a proposal that we're hoping could leverage our regional labor market, existing semiconductor and microchip industry. Some of these are holdovers from the original investments many, many years ago when New York was at its high. And draw new investments in the private sector, as my colleague from North Carolina talked about. It's really important to get the buy-in and the investment from the private sector, which we're seeing. I just wanted to also extend some gratitude here because we have other members that are very involved in this bipartisan reach on this proposal. Representative Morelli, who I kind of surround in Rochester area, Representative Higgins in the Buffalo area, Representative Langworthy, Molinaro, and also Representative Williams, who serves on this committee. But my question for you is, are you aware of the New York Smart I-Corridor Tech Hub proposal that has been, are you specifically aware of it has been
Yes,
indicated?
I am aware of it. I know you're taking that regional approach to all come together. As I said before, we have hundreds of applications. All of them are quite excellent. So we're going through them now, and we'll make announcements pretty shortly this fall. Okay, so the Phase 2 Tech Hub Notice of Funding Opportunities are going out. Is there still a plan, or is there an update on Phase 2 Tech Hub NOFA? Is that going to be released as well? This fall, yes. Okay. Let me ask you something. Are these going to be contingent on Phase 1 designation? Can we expect Phase 1 Tech Hub designees to be notified as well? Yes. Okay. So what I was saying to Congressman Jackson, we're required by statute to designate at least 20. Okay. And they have to be regionally diverse to make sure that the money doesn't just go to cities, rural as well. Mm-hmm. So there'll be designations, and then some will receive like a planning grant, and then a subset will receive a larger grant. But what I was saying is, even if you don't get the larger grant, but you're designated, we're committed to providing as much government support as we can to all the designees through, say, other commerce money or other money in the interagency, like the SBA and such. The reality is, we just need more money for these tech hubs. I mean, it was in the CHIPS and Science program, authorized at $10 billion, appropriated at $500 million, and so even the subset of the designees that receive the bigger grants, I can tell you this. We have a merit-based team. They're going to go through to evaluate. All of the ones that are designated are probably worthy for big grants. Like, they're high quality, but we just don't have enough money. Well, we urge you to obviously choose our tech hub, but we appreciate your testimony and hard work. We think we put together a great team of bipartisan effort, and really just grateful to all the representatives in upstate New York for coming back, because we were once the champions of industry and innovation, and we need to come back, and we have a great opportunity with this huge investment coming from Micron. So we appreciate your testimony. My time has run out, but thank you so much. I hear you. I would say I have heard from more members of Congress on tech hubs than anything else that I've done. It's unbelievable.
We protect our turf there.
I love it. I love the advocacy.
I'd like to recognize a gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this meeting. And Madam Secretary, really appreciate you being here. I'm going to talk about something different, regional tech hubs. That was a joke. I guess it wasn't funny. Similar to my other colleagues here, would appreciate your full consideration of the regional tech hub from our community that is not based in one of the largest cities in the state. Coming from Ohio's 13th congressional district, we do have a bit of a shadow over us from the larger cities, including Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. In Columbus, where Central Ohio is, we know that in Central Ohio, where the Intel project is, we hear a lot about the work from your agency and what is going to happen, but I encourage you to look at us in northeastern Ohio, as well as some other areas, smaller areas that have a lot to contribute to the opportunities to onshore chip manufacturing, as well as other domestic energy, domestic manufacturing in places that are very much used to doing so and have the spirit to do it as well, and not to mention the talent. I want to also thank you for your commitment to Northeast Ohio. We were in Cleveland together to announce some minority business opportunities, which is important to getting more folks into these industries, and recently held a webinar around accessing CHIPS funding for our community. We welcomed economic development companies, large businesses, nonprofits, as well as our universities, and they had a lot of questions, and I know that we submitted those to your office and look forward to the responses that we get from them. Just really want to hone in on the workforce conversation, because there's not an industry that I've met with that has said that they aren't struggling with the workforce, and certainly in manufacturing and technology we experience that as well. And want to highlight your comment that childcare is not a social issue, it's a business decision. Thank you for that. But specifically, if you could talk to us about the private businesses and what incentives or encouragement are you sharing with them to make sure we're getting locally based, Ohio-based folks on these Ohio-based projects. Certainly we take pride in the work that we're doing, but we want to make sure that folks in our communities are accessing them. How are you encouraging, incentivizing, demanding, mandating, if you will, those folks to work with our local employees?
Great, excellent, thank you. And it was great to visit with you. I thought we had a great visit. By the way, I just again want to say on tech hubs, I hear what you're saying, and we take that into account. Just because you're in a place that might not be Columbus or might not be, Raleigh, as your colleague said, we're going to take a hard look at the quality of the application, the quality of the technology that's in your community, and, make those merit-based decisions. With respect to your other question, I would say for the CHIPS money, we are requiring every company that applies as part of their application to show us their workforce plan. And I've actually built a team in the CHIPS office who just works with these companies to develop their workforce plans. And the reason I'm doing that is because I got to protect taxpayer money. I cannot give all this money to a company and then have them fail because they can't, find the talent they need to run the fab. And the same thing for childcare. You won't find the talent if you can't hire and retain women. So we are asking every company to do what you just said. What are your relationships with local universities, with local high schools, with local training partners, with local community colleges? How are you going to train the people in the community to do the jobs in your facilities? These fabs are massive. 5,000 people to build them, 5,000 people to work there. And so that's why when I say the workforce is as important as the technology, it is, and they got to train the people in the community if they're going to be successful.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you, Mr. Chair. You're back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Keene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for being here today.
Morning.
And I would talk a little bit about the tech hubs as well, as a strong advocate for New Jersey, because we have a rich history of fostering innovative entrepreneurs, and institutions like Rutgers universities are leading the way with proposals for initiatives such as the Regional Technology and Innovation Hub Program, making it crucial to recognize the importance of tech hubs and fueling the spirit of innovation. Can you continue to talk a little bit about the premise of the tech hubs and why they're so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been to Rutgers. I visited Rutgers, I don't know, a year or so ago, so I saw with my own eyes the impressive work that's happening there in robotics and other areas. And the whole point of the tech hubs, including if you are successful in New Jersey, is to find the next leading edge in innovation in artificial intelligence, quantum, biotech, AI, all of the things that are going to allow America to have a lead in the world. And it starts in universities. It starts in someone's lab somewhere and then gets translated into maybe a startup and then to a bigger company. So the point of the tech hubs is to have a whole network of these little like beehives of innovation where you bring together universities with companies, with innovators and entrepreneurs, and add some money to catalyze that kind of cutting edge, which ultimately leads to jobs. You know, like talking New Jersey, think about Bell Labs. Think about all the jobs and innovation that spun out of there.
In my district, I was there the last couple weeks.
It's amazing, right? I mean, amazing, amazing, amazing. Thousands and thousands of companies and people came out of that. Let's recreate that with tech hubs all across the country.
Right. Well, that's why this district that I represent is an innovation and infrastructure district, and continue to have those priorities. We need to continue to find that common ground. Can you talk a little bit about export controls and the importance of how we use export controls in our competition with the PRC?
Yeah, so that's the other side of the coin. Tech hubs is investing in America. Export controls, we have to make sure that China doesn't have access to our most cutting-edge technology. Since I've been secretary, we've added over 700 PRC entities to the entity list. More than 1/3 of all the Chinese entities on the list were put there under the Biden administration. And it's because we can't be selling our most sophisticated artificial intelligence chips or other technology to the PRC so that they can get it to put in their military and use it in a way to undercut our national security. I would say to everyone here, BIS needs more funding. We need more export enforcement agents. We need more tech experts. Like, increasingly, national security is about technology and keeping our edge over China, staying ahead of them. And so we have to control this technology so it doesn't wind up into the Chinese military.
Okay. Is there anything that you anticipated my next question, which was what do we need to do as a Congress to ensure that we continue to be on the leading edge of this fight?
Yeah, what I just said is that's it. You know, support the budget submission. BIS, once upon a time, wasn't necessarily as important as it might be today. Today, when you think about Chinese military capacity, you think about artificial intelligence, satellites, quantum, data. That's all tech where America leads. So if you want us to protect that fully and vigorously and enforce that, we do need more resources, more people, and more technical capacity, technical people who work with us.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Frost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary. Neo City is a new and growing 500-acre tech campus just south of my district that has applied to be one of the CHIPS and Science Act's regional technology and innovation hubs. It's a really beautiful project. I really encourage people to check it out. It shows how local government can really think big. Neo City includes Skywater Technology, a chip packaging facility set to quadruple its workforce in the next 2 years, and workforce development programs through Neo City Academy High School and 2 colleges in my district, Valencia College and the University of Central Florida. Madam Secretary, when selecting regional hubs, how is the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Administration taking into consideration local education and workforce development capacity, especially when the U.S. semiconductor industry has a worker shortage that can be filled by locally grown talent?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I'm not familiar with that particular application. I will go learn about it. But it sounds like exactly the kind of thing we're trying to incentivize, which is what you said. Bring in the high schools, bring in the community colleges, bring in the research universities, bring in the big companies like Skywater, and focus on an area of technology where you can go from excellent to world class. I do want to make that point, especially since Tech Hubs is so competitive. We're not trying to invest in places. This is a national security program. We want to advance the frontier of technology. So we're not going to go for places that that are distressed or that are, you know, pretty good on the technology. We want to go for places that are excellent on the technology, make a big investment where they can be world leading in that technology. But anyway, the workforce piece of it, in some ways, is the whole game. You need the people to work. So it'll be the merit-based process. The criteria leans heavily on the workforce component.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and definitely suggest checking out Neo City. I got to visit the campus. It's a huge project that'll include housing, companies. The school is right next to one of the companies where students get to go over there and learn about it. It's really, I think, going to provide a good model for how we can grow local talent. The massive investments of President Biden's CHIPS and Science Act will set the tone for what the domestic semiconductor industry looks like for years to come. And so we have the opportunity now to create an industry that prioritizes worker safety and well-being. We've had some great conversations with the AFL-CIO. It seems like companies are saying new jobs won't necessarily be union jobs, and there's a want for substantial ongoing collaboration with unions, the Commerce Department, and these companies to ensure labor standards are enforced. What steps has Commerce taken to prevent a race to the bottom in terms of labor and the fact that you know, there's competition with overseas semiconductor manufacturers?
Yeah. So as I said, we are, you know, we're never going to mandate to a company. There's Davis-Bacon's in the statute for the building of the facility, but these companies are going to have to make their own decisions with respect to the workers in the facility. That being said, this administration cares deeply about high labor standards and workplace conditions, safety, and wages. So we're having every company that's applied to give us their workforce plan, and we're going to work on that with them to make sure that they have, you know, high quality, well-compensated workforce to do the job. I see that as a taxpayer protection. They need a workforce who can, you know, get the job done.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Chairman Babbitt and Secretary Raimondo, for your time today. Secretary, your department works to ensure U.S. leadership in critical technologies such as artificial intelligence. This leadership depends on the nation's ability to bring advanced packaging onshore. Advanced packaging combines the fastest logic chips, specifically GPUs, and high bandwidth memory chips in certain design configurations, allowing the optional language, training, and inference techniques at the heart of AI. Do you have a good sense of which applicants or types of applicants best meet the advanced packaging needs?
We do. We do. As I said, we've had 400 statements of interest, some including leading-edge packaging, and it is part of our strategy to incentivize packaging, because we want to have at least a couple of leading-edge packaging investments in the U.S. as a result of this.
Since there's virtually no packaging done in the U.S., do you feel confident in the discussions with these few companies that work on advanced packaging that you can strike a deal and bring these technologies to the U.S.?
I do.
In August, the Commerce Department announced that in the year since the CHIPS Act was signed into law, that the CHIPS Program Office has received more than 460 statements of interest for projects in 42 states. Over August recess, I had the opportunity to visit with large chemical manufacturers in North Alabama who are exploring expansion to support new semiconductor manufacturing because of the CHIPS Act. While significant attention has been given to large fabrication projects announced in states such as California, Arizona, New York, and Ohio, is it important that projects in states like Alabama, where there is currently no significant presence of chip manufacturers, are given fair consideration? Can you specifically describe the CHIPS Program Office's efforts so far to ensure that the CHIPS Act is implemented as a national program with opportunities for states like mine that also want to play a critical role in the domestic semiconductor supply chain?
Yes, I can absolutely assure you of that. Listen, this is completely merit-based. There are no states or projects that have any advantages over any other. It's based upon who can help us hit our the mission of the program, which we've identified in a paper which we put out earlier this year. I'll say, of the $39 billion, we've said that $10 billion will be invested in mature node chips and also supply chain companies, which would include chemical companies like the one you're talking about. So we would encourage them to apply, and I promise you they'll get a really hard look.
Thank you, Secretary. North Alabama is home to a variety of space-based technology research and development companies, as well as NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. Both commercial companies and civil space organizations recognize the potential of utilizing microgravity as an environment to make smaller chips. Can you speak to the Department of Commerce's interest in ensuring that the regulations implementing the CHIPS Act directly acknowledges and supports the future of this important work in space?
Yes, it's a component. Although it sounds crazy to say that $39 billion is not enough money, we can't do everything, and these are massive projects. So I can assure you we are looking to do the most cutting-edge work, including with AI chips and space-related chips, to advance our national security goals, and that we'll look at all applications, very seriously.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Carvale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for coming in to speak with us. I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention Colorado's bid to be a tech hub, and look forward to following that process moving forward with you. Now, one of the best things about Colorado is the concentration of research universities we have that are primed to take advantage of the benefits of the CHIPS and Science Act. These include universities like CU Boulder, Colorado State, and MSU Denver, which Deputy Secretary Graves visited earlier this year. And while I'm eager to make sure that these institutions are able to take advantage of the various programs in the CHIPS Act, specifically CHIPS R&D and workforce programs, I also want to make sure that other institutions that maybe don't have the clout or the name recognition of a University of Colorado at Boulder are able to use these programs as well. My district is home to the University of Northern Colorado, which is a smaller public institution that's becoming an attractive option for many Coloradans. It's RUNC, perhaps lesser known than the North Carolina one, but it has seen a growing demand for undergraduate students to add more degrees into the STEM fields, and is offering computer science and statistics for the first time this semester as a major. Many more students are interested in mathematical sciences, and the university, I think, has been forward-thinking in expanding its expertise there. But I want to make sure that even though UNC is still growing, that they can compete with larger universities for new R&D and workforce programs being stood up by the department. So how is the department ensuring the smaller institutions that are still building their STEM programs, like UNC, will be able to engage in partnerships under the various CHIPS R&D and workforce programs?
Yes, thank you. Let me be really clear about this. We won't succeed unless we have community colleges, not just the Tier 1 research universities. In some ways, a lot of them are already doing their thing. We talked about Purdue earlier. We are completely focused on what you're talking about, especially when you have a college or a community college like that hooked into a bigger network of a statewide system. We need to be operating at every level. I said earlier, there's a massive shortage of semiconductor technicians. There's a massive shortage of cybersecurity technicians, of digital backbone workers. you know, every one that college can put out, we can put to work. So, and by the way, I lived this as governor. You know, when I was the governor of Rhode Island, we completely redid our community college and our non-research university, four-year granting university, to be focused on the industry needs, and it works. These students, in my experience, are incredibly hungry, hardworking, and they're the ones you need to support to get good jobs. So it's what we're doing. I mean, we are reaching out. We already have, I think, 50 community colleges around the country that we're kind of working with, or who have said they want to work with us to do what you said, like redesign the curriculum to match the needs. It's why we're asking companies to give us their workforce plan, and then we're going to work with them to say, have you thought about this college? What are you doing with this university? So the NSTC is going to have a big workforce component, semiconductor workforce component, which will work with these universities. The NSF has a couple $100 million for workforce. So across all of the R&D programs, there's a lot of workforce, and I promise you we're going to go out of our way to make sure it's inclusive. That being said, you just put that on my radar, so I'll make sure, you know, we focus in Colorado.
Perfect. I appreciate the concentration on, excuse me, these smaller institutions, and in particular that you're reaching out to make sure that they know about the resources that you have. And with that, my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Williams, the gentleman from New York.
Madam Secretary, well, good afternoon. It's nice to meet you, and thank you for being here. Before we get started, I spent 4 months in Rhode Island in 1991 at Officer Candidate School, and so if you'll indulge me, do you know how long the Newport Bridge is? You really don't have to answer that. So.
I don't, although I just kayaked under it in the Save the Bay swim.
Yeah, the Narragansett's beautiful, but I can tell you that it's 16 long weeks long, sir. That's how long it is. Corresponding to my time there. I'm proud to represent the heart of the Silicon Empire, which is Central New York. And as you know, Micron has announced a $100 billion investment, one of the largest in American history, to be part of this resurgence of chip manufacturing in the United States. We have a fantastic application for the Regional Technology and Innovation Hub from Western New York into Central New York. And this is just, think of it as the superhighway for the Silicon Empire. And we are also, in my district, home to some of our nation's most advanced weapon systems. And these are systems that require secure, reliable, and domestically produced silicon chips. So thank you for all you're doing and all those efforts. I come out of the tech industry. The new digital economy is increasing data creation at an exponential rate. And that's not hyperbole. Industries like transportation, power generation, process manufacturing, and even the retail shopping experience are increasingly data-driven. So solutions like artificial intelligence and self-driving cars need and create enormous amounts of data to be useful. And so I want to highlight the tremendous risk our nation faces that the production of memory chips is dangerously concentrated in Asia. May I invite your comments on how the CHIPS Program Office is planning to ensure domestic production of memory chips, specifically to protect the United States from relying solely on overseas production?
Yes. So we do have memory as a focus of our investment program. We've put out in our paper we want to have at least 2 clusters of leading edge logic, as well as advanced packaging, as well as memory, exactly as you said. You know, it's not made in America now, and we need to change that.
One of the perceptions I think for the layperson is often focused on the logic portion of silicon chips. We think about these advanced processors. But in this data-driven world, the ability to write into and out of quickly, to store vast amounts of storage, as we all know, on our phones, is increasingly sort of taking over the helm of chips and a central focus of chips. Are there any positive developments in memory chip manufacturing that you're aware of that you would draw attention to, beyond the announcement, for example, of Micron? Is there any other action or activity going on in memory chip in the United States running through your office?
That's the primary one. I mean, as you well know, there's only really three. There's two Korean companies, Samsung and Hynix, and then Micron. And we are interested, and right now, as you say, there's no really like most advanced memory made in America, which is something that we need to, remedy through investing in this program.
And urgently, and at scale, I might add.
And at scale. Yeah, I agree.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you. And now I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for honoring this committee's invitation to be here today.
Morning.
I'm proud that the EDA has a robust and positive working relationship with the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. I commend EDA's commitment to equity as a top priority in their grants and programs, as the administration encourages its grantees throughout the country to develop initiatives that present new ideas and creative approaches to advance economic prosperity in distressed communities. NIST has been vital in advancing U.S. innovation and competitiveness. As someone who likes cold hard facts, NIST work directly impacts the daily lives of citizens to improve not only physical tangibles like products, services, and infrastructures, but also improve our quality of life and standard of living. As a proud representative of Western Pennsylvania, my constituents expect us to address their concerns on the implications AI will have on our labor and our workforce. AI presents fascinating opportunities in STEM and advanced manufacturing, but we also need to exercise caution to ensure that we provide access to opportunity for skills training and education to every worker, and that we're truly understanding the ethical implications involved and the concerns regarding bias and discrimination. Investments in our future through legislation like the CHIPS and Science Act will only continue to foster more success stories like those in my district and across the country through the work that's done through NIST, but this work does change lives. Secretary Raimondo, how is the Department of Commerce collaborating with other agencies to ensure that domestic content requirements for tax credit incentives in industries like steel manufacturing ensure American competitiveness and robust business opportunities for small and mid-sized enterprises?
Sorry, can you, first of all, it's nice to meet you. Just say the last, I was with you on the AI, and then I...
Yeah, we left there.
No.
You've been here for a long time, and it's freezing in here. My question is about how Department of Commerce is collaborating with other agencies to ensure that domestic content requirements for tax credit incentives industries like steel manufacturing ensure American competitiveness and robust business opportunities for small and mid-sized companies.
Yeah, okay, sorry. We're really serious about enforcing all of that. I mean, you know better than most that Chinese dumping of cheap steel into the market has hurt a lot of people, including in your district. And so we have Buy America provisions and U.S. content requirements that wherever they are in statute, we enforce them. Also, on the other side of our house, in the Commerce Department, we also, maintain tariffs and countervailing duties wherever we need to, so we have a vibrant domestic steel industry. You can't be a strong country without making steel.
Thank you. And I was going to ask you about Western Pennsylvania's ecosystem for robotics and our autonomy sector, but a lot of folks have been able to actually ask questions about what I was going to say there, so I didn't want to overwhelm you with repetitive questions. But for my final question, with the development and expansion of the domestic production of semiconductors and other advanced technologies, how is your agency working to continually update the NIST Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework to ensure workforce development initiatives are effective in supporting labor but not supplanting labor?
Yes, exactly. Exactly what you just said. Working with NIST, but also the White House has been working across the interagency to put out other frameworks on the topic you just said, which is how do we deal with the fact that AI is going to change the way we all work, and we have to be there for all workers. You know, certain jobs will change, but we have to use AI to create jobs, not destroy jobs. For people's jobs will change, but we have to make sure that they are retrained to do different jobs and not left out.
Yeah, I thank you for the consideration that the agency will put into AI and workforce, as people, you know, people with disabilities, people who have various concerns will find increasing access to quality of life, but we do want to make sure that we're prioritizing workers. My time is done, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Secretary, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your patience. I know it's been a good bit. You spoke earlier, and you've been ongoingly talk about the importance of increasing opportunities for career and technical education. I could not agree more, so I'm going to dive right in and forgo my monologue. What is the Commerce doing to ensure that CHIPS funding goes to projects that will actually create jobs for Americans? And do you believe that the American workforce has the ability to complete these construction projects, and then has the engineers and technicians needed to operate these new fabs here in the country?
I do, but we have a lot of work to do. So I have a team on the CHIPS team who are helping figure out the construction workforce plans with each of the applicants. You know, so Ohio, like these facilities will require 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 people to build. The unemployment rate in the building trades right now, no matter where you live, is like 0, 2%. Yeah. So we need new apprenticeship programs. We need to recruit people in high school. We need girls and women to do these jobs. And will we do it? Yes, but I can't sugarcoat it. It's a lot of work. Same thing for in the fabs. We are pushing the companies, governors, mayors, educational institutions, update your curriculum. Teach people what's relevant so they can get these jobs.
Yeah, I mean, even in the state of Ohio right now, and as you know, the Intel project is coming to Columbus, which is just a couple hours south of the 7th District, but we're around 2,000 carpenters short right now for that project in Intel. And as you just said, with the 2% dip in the trades amongst the whole. Now, I love what you said about encouraging our educational system to promote more of the trades, K through 12, technical education and STEM workforce, and I applaud you for that. I just would really like to see it come from the state and local level and see more of an influx there throughout our entire country than doing what's easiest here, which is just more federal legislation that nobody needs, in my opinion, but I wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
Can I say one thing on that? As part of the incentive program, the CHIPS money we're putting out, we are requiring the applicant to come to us with money from the state, including workforce. So we're putting the burden on the company, say Intel in your case, for example, would go to Ohio or go to Columbus and find out what incentives, including workforce or apprenticeship programs, whatever, put it in the application before they apply to us. We're trying to draw forward all that at the local level. I also started an initiative called 1 Million Women in Construction. There's about 1 million women right now in America that work in construction. We got to try to double it. I mean,
I just met with the group actually right before here about women in construction. You know, I have a few questions here, but I'm just going to ask, what do you think when it comes to the technical education, the drawback that we're seeing amongst the trades? Do you attribute to work ethic? Do you attribute it to societal norms within this country changing? I mean, you've talked about innovation. You know, we've shipped off, you know, manufacturing to focus on innovation within this country, and we've lost out on that, so we don't have parity. I mean, where do you think it is? Because in Cleveland, Ohio, you know, our steel workers, it's hot in the summer, and it's very cold in the winter. And it is tough work, but what I can tell you is they're getting paid $120,000 a year right now with full pensions, and they will be millionaires, and our kids that are going to school will be $500,000 in debt. So just curious what your response is.
Totally agree. You know, I think it's a lot of things. We can maybe follow up when we have more than a minute. I do think the cultural norms, I think like pushing everybody to college isn't necessarily the right move. And like 40% of American kids who go to college drop out, so they have loans, no degree, and it's not a good path. So even when I was governor, I'm a big believer in vocational training, technical skills, apprenticeships. Girls should think of themselves as a plumber or as a welder. They can do these jobs. You know, the average entry level, like certified nurse assistant or home health care, which is heavily women, is like maybe like $15 an hour. And those are tough jobs too. the average plumber, apprentice, maybe $40 an hour, on your way to $80 an hour. So I think we have to start to say these are good jobs. They're good jobs for America. You know, not everybody has to be a PhD engineer or whatever. Go do these jobs, build the future of America, and make a good living.
I could not agree more. I'd love to follow up with you later on. Chairman, my time has ended. I yield back.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And now I'll recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for your leadership. I'd like to ask you some questions about artificial intelligence. AI has been a driver of our economy and will continue to be a driver of our economy. Last year, with the public release of large language models, individuals and companies now have access to very expensive AI technology at their fingertips. Largely, that's going to benefit society. It can also cause harm because some of these individuals would be terrorists or criminals. Just a few minutes ago, I went on ChatGPT and simply typed in, how can I build a lethal virus? And it said, I'm very sorry, but I can't assist with that. And then I asked, how do I build a dirty nuclear bomb? Same answer, I can't assist with that. And that's because ChatGPT is a closed AI system, and their programmers put in guardrails, so it doesn't answer those questions. Open source large language models, you can have the guardrails removed pretty easily. I want to know if you or the Department of Commerce has a view on whether there should be some regulations on open source AI large language models above a certain size.
Yeah. Let me say this and then answer your question directly. I agree. AI has incredible potential, which is incredibly exciting, especially in healthcare, if you think about, you know, finding cures to diseases more quickly. But the downside is just as scary, and that's why the White House has convened companies to take on voluntary commitments. I think we need to do that as a bridge to this body, Congress, enacting regulations. But yes, we have to think about the threats of open models and come up with a regulatory environment as well, because as I understand it, and you know more than I do, the open models are only like a generation behind the largest frontier large language models, which is to say they're pretty powerful. And so we do need to find ways to regulate and protect the downside for the open models.
Thank you. NIST has done incredible work, and they have put out a AI risk management framework that's gotten good reviews from both the public sector and private sector. Part of it is simply having organizations think through the issues raised by AI and have a process for working through those issues. Earlier this year, Congress members Zoe Lofgren, Haley Stevens, and I wrote a letter to the President asking him to apply the NIST risk management framework to the entire federal executive branch. So I'd like for you to request and consider applying the NIST risk management framework to the Department of Commerce. And if you would look into that, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Okay, I will.
And then lastly, I want to follow up on your comment that it was not such a great idea to push everyone into four-year colleges. And I think that if you look across our economy, there is a huge shortage of skilled workers in the trades. And so I support your efforts in that regard. Anything I can do to help incentivize having more people in the trades, I would like to help you with that.
Thank you.
With that, I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Casson from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chairman. Madam Secretary, nice to see you today. I want to chat a little bit. As you know, when we were debating what became the CHIPS and Science Act, our office was concerned about, with this huge amount of money, thankfully, that we're putting in, how do we make sure that those taxpayer money is not going to shareholders through buyback programs, and how do we put those protections in place? And ultimately, we weren't successful in getting the strong language we wanted in there. There's some weaker language in the bill, and such as the legislative process. But as a result of that, we We had led a letter last February to Michael Schmidt in your office asking basically what could we do administratively to put those stronger protections in. Grateful for a lot of the back and forth we had with your office afterwards, in addition to some of the statements that your office and you personally have made about giving preference to companies that are not going to engage in buybacks. Having said all that, I'm a little bit concerned about your exchange at the start of this hearing with Mr. Babin, saying that if a company, that would not be a prerequisite for funding if a company didn't make those commitments. And so, to my mind, if that's not a prerequisite, that raises the possibility that we may find ourselves in a situation giving money through CHIPS to a company that doesn't need the money, essentially displacing private capital and creating what we were concerned about 2 years ago, that wealth transfers from taxpayers to shareholders. And so I guess my first question for you is, when you say that you will be giving preference, can you explain mechanically what that means? Is this just a nice to have? How are you actually prioritizing when you make these investments?
Yeah. So as you well know, the statute says our money cannot be used for buybacks. So we're going to do everything we can to invest the money in accordance with the statute. What I was saying earlier, I think the question was a version of, can you guarantee you won't give money to a company that does buybacks? And the answer to that is no, we may. But we have a very rigorous system. This is like a lot of back and forth with these companies. They apply, and we have months or weeks of discussion. They need to show us their books, show us their financial plan, show us how much they're investing in research and development, and prove to us that they actually need our money to do whatever it is, that they're doing. So I think of it as like a balance. My number one job is to hit the national security goals. Also to protect taxpayer money, not use any, get a good deal, not give any company a dollar more than they need to hit the mission. And obviously, most important, to do what the statute says. So it is true that we have a preference for companies that won't do buybacks, mostly because we need them to put every single penny they have into their workforce, into innovation, into R&D. But I can't promise you that a company that does in their business do buybacks or has in the past done buybacks won't receive an incentive grant if we think the business they're in is necessary for our national security and they can't be successful in doing that without an incentive.
What enforcement do you have if you do all that, they make the voluntary pledge, and then 2 years from now they violate the pledge?
Yeah,
do you have clawback provisions you're putting in? Like legally, do you have recourse back to that taxpayer money?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because I should have said it before. All of these grants will be sent out in tranches. So let's say XYZ company receives a $2 billion grant. We're not going to wire them $2 billion. They're subject to an investment plan. So you can, get X amount, hit these milestones, get Y amount. If at any point along the way they break any of the conditions, either, depending on what they do, we can claw back money, or they don't get the next installation.
Okay. I'm out of time, but would welcome continuing the conversation and yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman from California is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your testimony and your leadership. My district in the San Francisco Bay Area is a hub of the innovation economy, so lots of folks are interested in how CHIPS and science is rolling out. In July, the Semiconductor Industry Association released a study that projected a shortfall of 67,000 workers in the semiconductor industry by 2030. As you know, to address this challenge, CHIPS and Science Act authorized a number of workforce development programs scattered throughout the CHIPS office, R&D programs and incentives programs. I am a veteran of our California Workforce Development Board, as well as our local Workforce Investment Board in San Mateo County. So my question is, how is the department's overall strategy enabling the semiconductor workforce through these programs, how that coordination is happening with the existing federal workforce funding streams, but also is there coordination going on with the state workforce development boards and state and local workforce boards. How is all of that being integrated, if it is?
It is. The way we're endeavoring to do that coordination is every company who applies for money or receives money has to give us a workforce plan that we approve after extensive back and forth. And in that plan is what is the state doing, what's the city doing, what's Commerce doing, but then also, you know, like as I said before, the NSF. So we're trying to have a plan in place for every, you know, company's proposal.
And
I also have a workforce team, I should say. I've built a workforce team at the CHIPS office in Commerce. So just to give you a sense, like we are really serious about the workforce component and providing technical assistance where we can so that everyone has a really fulsome workforce plan.
Great. And my district has over 600 life science companies, so I just wanted to ask you about how NIST collaborates with other agencies such as the FDA, for example, to create frameworks and standards that ensure biotech products go through the regulatory process in an efficient way. What kind of coordination is happening through your department and other entities like the FDA, for example?
Exactly what you say. I think NIST is, I give so much credit to them because they are like neutral, science-based place that works with industry but also other agencies, and I know biotech is one of the top priorities.
Thank you for your leadership, and with that I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman from New York is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank the Chair and Ranking Member for holding this important hearing, and Secretary Raimondo for your leadership at the Department of Commerce. New York State, and especially the Capital Region, the district that I represent, have been a pioneer in computing design, development, and manufacturing for nearly 80 years. Today, New York State is home to the world's most advanced microelectronic breakthroughs, including the foundational chip innovations that enable today's AI systems and the world's most powerful AI supercomputer. Our existing infrastructure paired with the deep bench of know-how means that New York is ready to become the linchpin for national efforts to coordinate NSTC activities aimed at alleviating the chip shortage and propelling sustainable R&D. I understand the Selection Committee will soon announce the Board of Trustees for the new nonprofit entity that will construct the NSTC. So, Madam Secretary, can you outline a timeline for the announcement of the board and next steps they will take once impaneled?
Yes. So in the next, couple of months, I think we'll have announcements about the board. Their first thing that they would do would be to announce the CEO of the NSTC, which also should all happen this fall. And then there will be a process to actually establish the NSTC early next year. And the decisions around how many locations, et cetera, will all be made, at that time.
And can you provide insight on the governance structure that the NSTC will use to operate?
So they will have a board. We have a selection committee now that's going to put an initial board in place. That initial board will choose a CEO and then other board members. And then our Department of Commerce will have a agreement with NIST, a research agreement, which similar to what NIST has done for a long time with other entities, which will lay out how they intend to use the federal money to execute their vision.
Thank you. And once the board is selected, how does the department intend to ensure that public-private partnerships drive solutions to the NSTC's grand challenges?
So the whole thing is a public-private partnership. As per statute, it's a consortia. We're committed to making this be a purpose-built, science-based, neutral effort. And as I said, there'll be a research agreement as between NIST and the NSTC, which will lay all of that out, and we will hold them accountable to what is in that agreement.
Thank you. And there was a white paper on the NAPMP that was supposed to be issued and has been delayed. Can you share any new or additional information on the timing and scope of the entity?
I just looked at one of my associates because it's coming very soon this fall. I was hoping he was going to say maybe next week, but I guess we'll stay on it.
Okay, so we'll go with this fall.
Yeah.
Okay. I have several academic institutions in my district that will be critical to educating and training the workforce needed to support industry demands, as well as conducting the advanced research for the next generation of chip technology. Can you provide insight into the department's work across federal agencies to ensure that collaboration with universities will incubate that research and science?
That's exactly the plan. You know, we're working with the NSF. We're actually working very well with the DoD across agencies to work with universities. The vision would be that the universities, look, someone asked me earlier what success looked like in 5 years. In 5 years, it's this seamless back and forth between industry, startups, and universities. So we get the inventions coming out of universities out of the lab and into products we make in America.
Okay. Well, again, I thank you for your responses. I thank you for your leadership. And, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you.
The chair now recognizes himself for 4 minutes. Madam Secretary, I thank you for your time. I may go over some stuff you've already talked about. I'm not sure, but man, they keep us bouncing around here. I'm also chair of the subcommittee for research and technology. So we talk about anything from semiconductors, AI, hypersonics, even did a roundtable on quantum technology. And I kind of want to ask about your trip to China, because China has stated that by 2045 they want to be not only just the economic leader, but militarily, socially, even in space. And from what we're gathering, a lot of it, they're ahead of us. You take quantum technology, I think they spend more than the entire world on developing that. So I'd like to know what you may have found out, if any of that, if there's any evidence of that, they're ahead of us, behind us, beside us, and what you learned there in China.
Yeah. So look, I'm as concerned as you are that we can't let them get ahead, and we certainly can't let them get any of our technology to do things that could hurt us. You know, I think that with respect to AI, the U.S. leads the world, and we need to stay there. I also know that, as you say, the Chinese government is putting hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars into these technologies with the express goal of dominating. So when I was there, I was clear that we don't negotiate when it comes to national security. We don't compromise. And I was clear that we're not going to make any changes to, for example, our export controls, which is what I work on. We're going to continue to vigorously control U.S. technology so they cannot get this technology for their military. And I also was clear that as long as they have this military-civil fusion strategy, where really everything is the military, and they can go into any company and take technology and use it for the military, that means we're going to have to be tougher than ever to control that technology from getting into the hands of their military. It's not that we want to, hold back their economy per se, but we do want to hold back their military, and I was very clear in saying that.
Yeah, well, I think we should hold back their economy too. I'm very much America first, which I guess kind of leads me into my next question. I also sit on natural resources. So we've been all over the country talking about critical minerals and the fact that we're down to 3 smelters. China processes 80% of our critical minerals here from what we provide. And as far as Taiwan and semiconductors, we know that China even threatened to withhold critical minerals from them. And I heard you the few minutes I was in here earlier, you were talking about making sure that we bring semiconductors home, and I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. But we have, and this administration has really made a concerted effort, and it's been several administrations, to not allow people to mine here in the States. And I don't understand how you can advocate semiconductors here in this country when China's already shown that they're willing to withhold critical minerals, and we're not willing to mine critical minerals here in our own country?
So I can't speak to what's been done in the past, but I do think you're right. You're right. We are dependent on them, and we have to do everything we can to either mine here or on allied shores. And for my part of it, I'm going to do what I need to do with export controls to hold them back. But when I think about chips, the chip's just one piece of it. It's the raw materials, it's the rare earths, the critical minerals, and we do need a holistic strategy on that.
Right, right. All right, I am out of time. I thank you. I want to thank the Secretary for joining us today and the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 10 days for additional comments and written questions from members. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.